My son called me at 6:30 in the morning. He has never called that early unless something is wrong. I picked up and his voice on the other end was urgent. Mom, don't go home today. I didn't understand what he meant, but I decided to trust him. When I returned, what I saw made me freeze, because my daughter and son-in-law were there as if I had just walked into a plan that had already been prepared. I'm truly grateful you're here with me right now. Before we go further, take a moment to comment where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Please note, parts of this story are thoughtfully adapted to deepen its meaning. Any resemblance to real people or places is coincidental, but the message is meant to be reflected on. The phone rang at 6:28 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was staring at the microwave clock when my cell buzzed on the kitchen counter. 6:28 a.m. Tuesday, October 29th, 2023. The numbers glowed green in the dim light. Outside my window, Spokane was still wrapped in that soft slate blue darkness that comes just before sunrise in late October. The air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's early fire. I'd been up since 6, the way I always am these days. So morning sleep just doesn't come easy when you live alone. I picked up the phone. Thomas's name lit up the screen. My son doesn't call at 6 in the morning unless something's wrong. Dear Thomas. My voice came out scratchy. I cleared my throat. Honey, what's... Mom. His voice was low controlled, but I heard the urgency underneath. Listen carefully. Don't come home today. I froze coffee mug halfway to my lips. What? I can't explain right now. I need you to trust me. Get in your car and go to Carol's house. Don't ask questions, just go, please. My heart started to hammer. Thomas, you're scaring me. What's happening? I'll explain later, I promise. But right now, you need to leave. Don't go back to the house. Go to Carol's. Can you do that for me? I set the mug down, my hand shaking. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the block. The neighbor's dog barked once, then went silent. Yes, I whispered. I can do that. Good, I love you, Mom. The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, our kitchen, the one Robert and I had remodeled in 1995, the butcher block countertops he'd sanded by hand, the cabinets he'd built from scratch, and felt the floor tilt under my feet. My son's voice echoed in my head. Don't come home today. What did that even mean? This was my home, the house at 2847 South Grand Boulevard, the 2-story Craftsman with the wraparound porch and the rose garden Robert planted the year Thomas was born. The house we'd bought in 1987 for $89,000 when Christine was 2 years old, and Thomas was still just a dream we whispered about on Sunday mornings. I didn't understand, but I trusted my son. I grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, my keys, my jacket. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip the coat. I walked out through the back door. Something in me didn't want to look at the front of the house, didn't want to see whatever Thomas didn't want me to see, and climbed into my old Honda Accord. The leather seats were cold. Frost had settled on the windshield overnight, a delicate lace of ice that I scraped off with trembling fingers. The engine turned over with a low rumble. I backed out of the driveway and turned left onto South Grand, heading toward Carol's house on the other side of the South Hill neighborhood. The streets were empty. A few porch lights glowed yellow in the gray dawn. Spokane in October is quiet like this, the kind of quiet that sits heavy in your chest. As I drove, my mind raced. I thought about the house Robert and I had walked through 36 years ago with a realtor named Donna who wore too much perfume and kept calling it a fixer-upper. Robert had seen past the peeling paint and the sagging porch. He'd seen the bones, the solid oak beams, the original hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves in the living room that some craftsman had carved by hand in 1923. We can make this beautiful, Barb, he'd set his hand warm in mine. We can make this ours. And we did. He'd spent weekends sanding floors, rewiring outlets, rebuilding the front porch, step by step. I'd painted walls, hung curtains, planted roses along the south fence. Christine had taken her first steps in that living room. Thomas had learned to ride a bike in the driveway. We'd hosted Thanksgivings and Christmases and birthday parties. We'd fought and made up and slow danced in the kitchen when the radio played our song. And then 4 years ago, I'd lost him. Robert passed away on a Tuesday morning in November 2019, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. He was 67 years old. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. He died in our bedroom in the bed we'd shared for 38 years, holding my hand and telling me he loved me. I hadn't wanted to stay in the house after that. For weeks, I'd wandered through the rooms like a ghost, touching the things he'd built, the bookshelves, the porch railing, the wooden bench in the backyard, and feeling the weight of his absence press down on my lungs. But I stayed, because leaving felt like losing him all over again. The house was all I had left of Robert. His workshop in the garage still smelled like sawdust and varnish. His tools hung on the pegboard, each one in its place. The rose garden bloomed every spring, the bushes he'd planted and pruned with his careful, calloused hands. And now Thomas was telling me not to come home. I turned onto Carroll Street, my throat tight. Carol Fletcher had been my best friend for 30 years. We'd met at a PTA meeting when our kids were in elementary school, bonded over terrible coffee and a shared love of mystery novels. She was a retired nurse, sharp as a tack, with silver hair she wore in a practical bob and a laugh that could fill a room. 2 months ago, she'd had knee replacement surgery. I'd been checking on her almost every day, bringing groceries, helping her with physical therapy exercises. I pulled into her driveway and killed the engine. The sky was starting to lighten now, a thin line of gold breaking through the clouds on the eastern horizon. Carol's porch light was on. I could see movement through the living room window. She was awake. I climbed out of the car and walked up the path. My legs felt like jelly. I raised my hand to knock, but the door swung open before I could. Carol stood there in her bathrobe, leaning on her cane, her face pale. "Barbara," she said. Her voice was soft, careful. "What happened?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what had happened. All I knew was that my son had called me at 6:28 in the morning and told me not to come home, and that the house I'd lived in for 36 years, the house I'd built with the man I loved, the house that held every memory of the life we'd made together, suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Carol didn't press me for answers right away. She just took my arm gently, the way she used to guide patients down hospital corridors, and led me through the hallway into her small, sunlit kitchen. The room smelled like chamomile and honey. She'd been brewing tea when I arrived. "Sit," she said, her voice firm but kind. I sank into the chair by the window, my legs finally giving out. Carol moved slowly, leaning on her cane as she reached for a second mug. Her knee was still healing from surgery 8 weeks ago. She set the mug in front of me, steam curling up in soft wisps. The sky outside was lighter now, pale gray, bleeding into gold. "Tell me," Carol said, settling across from me. Her gray eyes, sharp, steady, the eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years in emergency rooms, didn't leave my face. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my cold fingers. "Thomas called me at 6:28 this morning," I said. "He told me not to come home. He wouldn't explain why. He just said, 'Don't go back to the house.'" Carol's jaw tightened. "And you have no idea why?" "No." He sounded scared. "Thomas doesn't scare easily." Carol leaned back, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. "When was the last time you talked to Christine?" The question landed like a stone in my chest. Christine, my daughter, 38 years old. The little girl I'd rocked to sleep every night, the toddler who used to sit in Robert's garage workshop, her small hands sticky with sawdust. The woman who 4 years ago had stood in my living room on the day of Robert's funeral and asked me when I was planning to sell the house. "I talked to her last week," I said. Small talk. She didn't mention anything unusual. "And before that," I hesitated. "A month ago, she wanted to borrow money." Carol's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd watched this pattern unfold for years. After Robert passed away in November 2019, almost 4 years ago now, everything changed. Robert had been the steady one, the peacekeeper. Thomas was solid, dependable, the kind of son who called every Sunday. Christine was complicated, ambitious, restless. She'd married Cameron Hayes 6 years ago, a smooth-talking investment advisor with a nice suit and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'd never trusted Cameron. Robert hadn't either. "He's too polished, Barb," Robert had said the night before Christine's wedding. "Men like that, they're always selling something." After Robert passed, Christine started asking for money. Not right away, she waited 3 months. Then it was $5,000 for unexpected car repairs. Then $10,000 for a business opportunity. Then $20,000 because Cameron's firm was going through a rough patch. I gave her the first loan. By the third, I'd stopped calling them loans because we both knew she was never going to pay me back. Thomas had confronted her about it last Christmas. We'd all been at my house when Christine cornered me in the kitchen and asked for $15,000. Thomas overheard. The argument that followed was quiet but vicious. "You can't keep bleeding Mom dry," Thomas had said, his voice low and tight. "She's living on a fixed income." Christine had turned on him, her face flushed. "You don't understand. You have your tech job, your 6-figure salary in Seattle. Some of us are struggling." I'd told Christine no. She'd left early. She hadn't spoken to me for 2 months. But she'd come back. She always came back. How much did she ask for last month? Carol's voice pulled me back. I looked down at my tea. $50,000. Carol's eyebrows shot up. 50,000? She said Cameron's investment firm was in trouble. Lawsuits from clients. She begged me. She cried. My voice cracked. I said no. I told her I didn't have that kind of money. I'm living on Robert's pension and Social Security. My savings are for emergencies. Carol reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You did the right thing. She's my daughter. What if she really is in trouble? Barbara. Carol's voice was gentle but firm. Christine and Cameron's problems are not your responsibility. You've given them enough. I knew she was right, but knowing something and feeling it are two different things. I thought about Robert's funeral. The house had been full of people when Christine pulled me aside. "Mom," she'd said, her voice low, "we need to talk about the house." I'd stared at her. "The house? Dad's will, the estate. I just want to make sure everything is clear." Robert's will had been simple. Everything went to me, the house, the savings, the pension. It was standard. Christine knew that. We'd explained it to her and Thomas years ago. But standing there 2 hours after we'd buried my husband, Christine, had looked at me with something I didn't recognize. Something hungry. "The will says everything goes to you," she'd said carefully. "But you're not planning to sell, are you? It's a big house for one person, and the market's good." I'd asked her to leave, politely but firmly. Thomas had stayed. He'd helped me clean up, sat with me in the quiet house while I cried. Now, 4 years later, I wondered if Christine had ever been the person I thought she was. "Carol," I said slowly, "what if Christine is the reason Thomas told me not to go home?" Carol didn't answer right away. "Has she asked about the house recently?" "She's been calling more often, asking if I've thought about downsizing." The word hung in the air. Downsizing, moving, selling, giving up the house Robert and I had built our lives in. Carol leaned forward. "Barbara, if Thomas told you not to go home, there's a reason. And if that reason has anything to do with Christine and Cameron." She paused. "You need to be very careful." I looked out the window. The sun was rising, spilling gold across the South Hill neighborhood. Somewhere out there, 4 miles away, was my house, my home, and I wasn't allowed to go back. "Last month," I whispered, "she wanted $50,000. Carol didn't say anything for a long moment. She just sat there, her tea growing cold between her hands, watching me with that steady, assessing gaze nurses develop after decades of reading people's pain. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Barbara," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Has anything else strange happened recently? Anything at all?" I opened my mouth to say no, to tell her that everything had been fine, normal, the same quiet routine I'd settled into after Robert passed. But the words caught in my throat, because something had happened. I'd pushed it out of my mind, told myself it was nothing, an accident, a mistake. But now sitting in Carol's kitchen with the morning light spilling across the table and Thomas's warning still ringing in my ears, I wasn't so sure. "July," I said slowly. "Something happened in July." Carol set her mug down. "Tell me." It had been a Thursday afternoon, the kind of scorching summer day Spokane gets in late July when the thermometer climbs into the 90s and the air smells like dry grass and distant wildfires. I'd been watering the rose garden, the hose coiled at my feet, when Cameron's silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. I'd been surprised. Christine and Cameron didn't usually drop by unannounced. Cameron climbed out all smiles and easy charm, dressed in khakis and a polo shirt that looked like it had been ironed that morning. He waved as he walked up the path. "Hey, Barbara," he'd called. "Hope I'm not interrupting." I'd turned off the hose and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Cameron, I wasn't expecting you." "I know, I'm sorry. Christine's at a conference in Seattle real estate thing and I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by and check on you." He flashed that smile of his, the one that was all white teeth and practiced warmth. "You know how Christine worries." I hadn't known that. Christine rarely called unless she needed something. But I didn't say that. "Come in," I'd said. "I'll make coffee." We'd sat at the kitchen table, the same table Robert had built from reclaimed oak 30 years ago, and made small talk. Cameron told me about a client who'd invested in tech stocks. I told him about the new book I was reading, a mystery set in Maine. The conversation was pleasant, forgettable. After about 20 minutes, Cameron excused himself. "Mind if I use the restroom?" "Of course. You know where it is." He disappeared down the hallway. I'd heard the bathroom door close, the sound of water running. He was gone, maybe 3-4 minutes. When he came back, he'd thanked me for the coffee, said he had to get going, and left. I hadn't thought anything of it. 3 days later. I told Carol now, my voice tight. I woke up and took my morning medication. Blood pressure pills. I've been taking them for 10 years, same routine every day. 1 pill with breakfast. Carol nodded. She knew this. She'd been the one who'd helped me set up my pill organizer after Robert passed, when everything felt overwhelming and I kept forgetting whether I'd taken my medication or not. I swallowed the pill. I continued and went about my morning, made tea, read the paper. Then about 20 minutes later, I started feeling wrong. The memory washed over me sharp and vivid. I'd been standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing my teacup when the dizziness hit. Not the gentle, manageable kind, the kind that makes you sit down and take a breath. This was sudden and brutal, like the floor had tilted sideways. My heart started pounding fast and erratic, a frantic drumbeat in my chest. The room blurred. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, but my legs felt like water. I'd sunk to the floor, my back against the cabinets, trying to breathe. My hands were shaking. My vision tunneled. For a terrible moment, I thought I was having a heart attack. That's when Carol had walked in. She had a key to my house. We'd exchanged keys years ago, just in case. She'd been stopping by every few days that summer to bring me vegetables from her garden. She'd knocked, gotten no answer, and let herself in. She'd found me on the kitchen floor, pale and trembling. "Barbara." She'd dropped the bag of tomatoes and been at my side in an instant, her hands on my wrist, checking my pulse. "What happened?" "I don't know," I'd gasped. "I took my medication and then—" Carol's eyes had sharpened. "Your blood pressure medication." I'd nodded. She'd stood, moved quickly to the bathroom, faster than she should have with her bad knee, and come back with my pill bottles. I'd watched confused as she'd unscrewed the caps and examined the pills inside. Then her face had changed. "Barbara," she'd said, her voice very calm, very controlled. "When did you last refill these prescriptions?" "Last week." "Why?" She'd held up the 2 bottles. One was labeled lisinopril, blood pressure. The other was labeled Ambien, sleep aid. "Look at the pills," she'd said. I'd looked. The pills in the blood pressure bottle were small, round, and pale blue. The pills in the Ambien bottle were oval and white. "Now look at the labels." I'd stared. The blue pills, my blood pressure medication, were in the bottle labeled Ambien. The white pills, my sleep aid, were in the bottle labeled lisinopril. The labels had been switched. "Someone swapped them," Carol said now, her voice hard. "Someone took the labels off your pill bottles and put them on the wrong containers." I nodded, my throat dry. "You told me it must have been a mistake at the pharmacy. You drove me there that afternoon and we talked to the pharmacist. He swore they'd filled the prescription correctly. He even checked their records. Everything was right on their end." "And you believed him," Carol said. "I did, because the alternative was—" I trailed off. "That someone did it on purpose," Carol finished. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking again. "Carol," I said quietly. "Cameron was in my house 3 days before that. He went to the bathroom. He was alone in there for several minutes. The medicine cabinet, that's where I keep my pill bottles. Carol's jaw tightened. I remember. You told me he'd stop by. You said he was being nice, checking on you. I thought he was. Barbara. Carol's voice was low and fierce. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't the pharmacy. That was deliberate. I shook my head even though I knew she was right. But why would he... Think about it, Carol interrupted. What would have happened if I hadn't come by that morning if you'd been alone when you took that Ambien, thinking it was your blood pressure medication? I closed my eyes. Ambien was a strong sedative. Taking it in the morning on an empty stomach, thinking it was something else, I could have passed out, fallen, hit my head. At my age, a fall like that could be serious, could be life-changing. You could have ended up in the emergency room, Carol said, her voice gentler now, with a head injury or worse, and the doctors would have run tests, checked your medications, and found that you'd taken the wrong pill. They would have thought I was confused, I whispered, that I'd mixed up my medications, that I wasn't capable of living on my own anymore. Carol nodded slowly. They would have put it in your medical record. Patient exhibits medication confusion, possible cognitive decline. The words hung in the air between us, cold and sharp. Cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's. The kind of diagnosis that would make a judge question whether I was competent to manage my own affairs. The kind of diagnosis that would give a family member legal grounds to take over, to take control of my house. Carol, I said, my voice breaking, if you hadn't found me that morning. But I did, Carol said firmly. She reached across the table and took both my hands in hers. I did find you, and I fixed it. I switched the labels back. I told you to be careful. And you've been fine since then. But he tried, I whispered. Cameron tried to... I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the words out loud. Cameron had tried to hurt me, had tried to make me look incompetent, had tried to create a medical record that could be used against me. And I'd let him into my house. I'd made him coffee. I'd smiled and chatted and never suspected a thing. Carol squeezed my hands. Barbara, listen to me. You're safe now. You're here with me. Thomas told you not to go home, which means he knows something. He's protecting you. But what if... My voice cracked. What if I hadn't listened to him? What if I'd gone home this morning? Carol didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both knew what would have happened. Whatever Christine and Cameron had planned, whatever reason Thomas had for telling me to stay away, it was happening right now, at my house, without me there. And if I'd been home, if I'd walked into whatever trap they'd set, you're safe, Carol said again, her voice steady and sure. You're safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me, and I was still falling. The silence in Carol's kitchen stretched between us, heavy and thick. Outside, the sun had fully risen, spilling golden light across the worn floor. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Carol's hands were still wrapped around mine. She was looking at me with that careful expression, the one she used when a patient wasn't telling the whole story. Barbara, she said quietly, is there anything else? I wanted to say no, but that would be a lie. September. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 6 weeks ago, there was a dinner. Carol's grip tightened. Tell me. It had started with a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon in early September. I'd been in the garden when my cell rang. Christine's name lit up the screen. Mom, how are you? I'm fine, honey. Good. Listen, Cameron and I want to have you over for dinner this Saturday. Cameron's making his famous pasta, you know, the one with the homemade marinara. I'd been surprised. Christine didn't invite me over often. That sounds lovely, I'd said. Great, say 6 o'clock. Oh, and Mom. She paused. Let's make it just us three this time. Family time. Just you, me, and Cameron. What about Thomas? You know Thomas. He's so busy with work. And honestly, I feel like we don't get enough one-on-one time with you. It had seemed reasonable. Of course, I'd love that. Saturday evening, I'd driven to Christine and Cameron's house on the north side of Spokane. They'd bought it 4 years ago, a 2-story suburban home with white siding and a neat lawn. Cameron had answered the door wearing an apron. Barbara, come in. Hope you're hungry. The house smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Christine had hugged me in the foyer. "I'm so glad you're here, Mom." We'd eaten in the dining room. The pasta was good. We talked about safe topics, whether Christine's real estate listings, a vacation they were planning. It had been pleasant. Almost. Looking back now, I realized how carefully they'd managed the evening. How Christine had kept my wine glass full. How Cameron had asked about my health, my routines. How they'd both smiled just a little too much. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom upstairs. Christine's powder room was being renovated, she'd said. I'd climbed the staircase narrow wooden steps with a polished oak railing. Halfway up, I noticed the dampness. The steps were wet, not soaked, but damp enough that I could feel it through my shoes. I paused, confused. Then I looked up and saw Cameron at the top of the landing holding a mop. "Oh, sorry, Barbara," he called. "I was just cleaning up, spilled some water earlier." He stepped back. I continued climbing more carefully, now one hand on the railing. I made it to the 8th step when my foot slipped. It happened so fast. My shoe slid out from under me and I was falling backwards, arms flailing. I grabbed for the railing, but my hand slipped on the polished wood. I tumbled down 3 steps before my shoulder slammed into the wall, my hip twisted beneath me, pain shooting through my right side. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then Christine was there, her face pale. "Mom, oh my God, are you okay?" Cameron thundered down behind her. "Don't move her, I'm calling 911. "No, I'm okay, I just slipped." But Christine was already pulling out her phone. "We need to get you checked out." 20 minutes later, I was in an ambulance. The emergency room at Providence Sacred Heart had been busy that night. I'd waited on a gurney for nearly an hour before a doctor came. He'd been young, maybe early 30s, with tired eyes. He checked my shoulder, my hip. "Nothing broken," he said. "You've got some bruising. You'll be sore, but you were lucky." Christine had been standing at the foot of the bed. "Doctor," she said softly, "I'm concerned about my mother. She's been forgetting things lately, getting confused. And now this fall," I stared at her. "Christine, I'm not—" "Mom, it's okay." She looked at the doctor. "She mixed up her medications a few weeks ago, took the wrong pills, and she's been having dizzy spells. I'm worried she's not safe living alone." The doctor turned to me. "Ma'am, have you been experiencing dizziness?" I hesitated. I had felt dizzy that morning in July, but that was because someone had switched the labels. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not often." The doctor made a note. I saw him type, "Patient reports dizziness. Daughter concerned about cognitive decline." "I'm not confused," I said louder. "I slipped because the stairs were wet." "Of course, Mom," Christine said soothingly. But I saw the look she exchanged with the doctor, the look that said she doesn't realize. Thomas had called the next morning. "Mom, why didn't anyone tell me you felt—" "It was just a little accident. I'm fine." "You went to the ER. That's not fine. And why wasn't I there?" Christine said it was family time. Silence, then, "Mom, I am family." "I know, sweetheart." It was Christine shutting me out. Again. He exhaled sharply. "I'm coming down next weekend." Now in Carol's kitchen, I looked down at my hands. My shoulder still ached sometimes. "The stairs were so wet," I said quietly. "Too wet for just a spill. And Cameron was standing right there holding the mop like he'd been waiting." Carol's face was grim. "And Christine made sure the doctor wrote down that you were confused?" I nodded. "She told him I'd mixed up medications. She made it sound like I was losing my mind." "That was the point," Carol said. "They were creating a medical record, documentation that you're having balance issues, cognitive problems. 2 incidents in 2 months, that's a pattern." The room tilted around me. "They set me up," I whispered. "The wet stairs, the 911, call Christine telling the doctor I was confused. It was all planned." Carol nodded. "And they got exactly what they wanted. A medical record that says you're not stable." I thought about Christine's face in the ER, the concern in her eyes. I'd thought she was worried about me, but she'd been acting. "Thomas knew," I said. "He was angry he hadn't been invited. He said Christine was shutting him out, because Thomas would have seen through it," Carol said. My throat tightened. "They didn't want him there." "No," Carol said quietly. "My own daughter had staged an accident, had manipulated doctors, had created a false narrative about my mental state. They got their medical record." I said, my voice shaking. "What else are they planning?" Carol's grip tightened. "I don't know, But whatever Thomas saw this morning, I think we're about to find out. I didn't need Carol to ask if there was more. The memories were flooding back now, one after another, like a dam had broken, and I couldn't stop the rush. 2 weeks ago, I said, my voice steadier now but hollow. Someone broke into my house. Carol went very still. It had been the first weekend in October. Thomas had called me on a Thursday evening, his voice warm and relaxed. "Hey, Mom, what are you doing this weekend?" "Oh, the usual. Garden work, maybe bake some bread. Come visit me instead." I'd been surprised. Thomas rarely asked me to make the drive to Seattle. He knew it was 4 hours each way, and he usually came to me instead. "Really," I'd said. "Really, I miss you, and there's a new Italian place I want to take you to. My treat." So I'd packed a small overnight bag and driven west on Friday afternoon through the rolling hills of eastern Washington and over the Cascade Mountains. Thomas had met me at his apartment in Capitol Hill, a small one-bedroom with a view of the Space Needle, and we'd spent the weekend together. Dinner at the Italian restaurant. A walk through Pike Place Market on Saturday morning. Coffee at a little shop he loved. It had been wonderful. Easy. The kind of time I treasured with my son. I'd driven home on Monday afternoon, arriving back in Spokane around 5 o'clock. The October light was already fading the sky a soft lavender gray. I'd pulled into my driveway, grabbed my bag from the trunk, and walked up the path to the front door. Everything had looked normal from the outside. But when I'd walked around to the back, I always entered through the kitchen door, a habit from years of carrying groceries. I'd stopped dead. The door was ajar. The frame around the lock was splintered raw wood, showing where someone had forced it open. My heart had started pounding. I'd stood there for a moment, frozen, my keys dangling from my hand. Then I'd backed away, slowly pulled out my cell phone, and dialed 911. The deputy who'd arrived 20 minutes later had been a man in his late 30s, built solid and compact with short dark hair and sharp gray eyes. He'd introduced himself as Deputy Marcus Webb, Spokane County Sheriff's Office. "Ma'am," he'd said, his voice calm and professional, "I need you to stay outside while I clear the house. Can you do that for me?" I'd knotted my throat too tight to speak. He'd gone inside, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. I'd waited on the back porch, hugging myself against the evening chill, listening to the sound of his footsteps moving from room to room. The house had felt violated even from the outside, like something sacred had been torn open. After what felt like an eternity, Deputy Webb had come back out. "It's clear, no one's inside. Let's go in together and you can tell me what's missing." We'd walked through the house, and that's when the strangeness of it had hit me. The television in the living room untouched. My laptop on the kitchen table still there. Robert's old watch collection in the bedroom dresser, exactly where I'd left it. But when I'd checked my filing cabinet in the den, my hands had started shaking. The title deed to the house. I'd said, my voice thin. "It's gone. And my homeowner's insurance paperwork, and some jewelry from my mother. Nothing expensive, just sentimental pieces." Deputy Webb had been writing everything down in a small notebook. He'd paused his pen, hovering over the page. "Nothing else?" he'd asked. "No electronics, no cash?" "I don't keep cash in the house, and no, everything else is here." He'd looked around the room, his jaw tight. "Mrs. Thornton, this wasn't a typical burglary. Most break-ins, they go for things they can sell quickly. TVs, laptops, jewelry, anything they can fence. This person knew exactly what they wanted. They came for documents." I'd felt a chill run down my spine. "Why would someone want my house papers?" "That's a good question," he'd said, "and one we need to answer. I work a lot of cases involving elder fraud financial scams targeting seniors. This has some of those markers. Someone targeting specific documents that prove ownership insurance coverage. That's not random." He'd ask me questions then. Who knew I'd be gone that weekend? Had I told anyone about my trip? Did I have any family members who might have access to my house? I'd hesitated on that last one. "My daughter has a key," I'd admitted. "Christine. And her husband, Cameron. But they wouldn't—" "I'm not accusing anyone, ma'am," Deputy Webb had said gently. "I'm just trying to establish who had opportunity." Then he'd asked if anyone had seen anything unusual. I told him I didn't know, I'd only just gotten home. "Let me talk to your neighbors," he'd said. 10 minutes later, Deputy Webb had returned with George Wilson, my neighbor, from 3 doors down. George was a retired teacher in his early 70s, a kind man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, who spent most of his time tending his rose garden. Barbara. George had said, his face concerned, "I'm so sorry this happened. I wish I'd known you were having trouble." "George saw something Friday night," Deputy Webb had said. "Tell her what you told me." George had shifted uncomfortably. "It was around 9 o'clock. I was letting my dog out before bed, and I saw a vehicle parked in front of your house. A black SUV. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe you had a visitor. But the person who got out, they went around to your back door. And they were only inside for maybe 5-10 minutes. Did you see who it was?" I'd asked. George had shaken his head. "It was too dark, but Barbara..." He'd hesitated. "The SUV, it looked like the one your son-in-law drives, that silver-black Lexus." I'd felt the ground tilt beneath me. "Cameron's car." "I can't be sure," George had said quickly. It was dark, and I wasn't really paying attention, but it looked similar. Deputy Webb had written that down. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm going to recommend you change your locks immediately. All of them front, back, garage. And consider installing a security camera system. Something with motion sensors and cloud storage, so if anything happens again, we'll have footage." I'd nodded numbly. "Okay." "And Mrs. Thornton." His voice had been serious. "If your daughter or son-in-law ask to come over in the next few days, maybe have someone else here with you. A friend. Someone you trust." He'd left his card with his direct number. Told me to call if I remembered anything else or if anything unusual happened. I'd stood in my kitchen after he left, staring at the splintered door frame, and realized something. Only 2 people had known I'd be in Seattle that weekend. I'd mentioned it to Christine on the phone the week before, casually. Thomas invited me to visit. I'm driving over on Friday. And Christine had told Cameron. Now, sitting in Carol's kitchen with the morning sun streaming through the window, I looked down at my hands. They were shaking again. "I had the locks changed the next day," I said quietly. "And I installed cameras, front door, back door, driveway. Thomas helped me set them up the following weekend." Carol's face was pale. "And you're sure only Christine and Cameron knew you'd be gone?" "Saunis dinti." "I'm sure. I didn't tell anyone else. Not even you. You were busy with your physical therapy appointments that week." "Barbara." Carol's voice was hard. "They broke into your house to steal your title deed. That's not a random crime. That's someone planning to commit fraud." "But why would they need..." I stopped. "Because I knew why. If someone wanted to sell my house without my permission, they'd need the title deed, or at least a copy of it. Something they could use to forge documents to create fake paperwork that made it look like I'd agreed to the sale." Carol saw the realization dawn on my face. "They took your documents so they could use them against you," she said softly. "The medication incident gave them a medical record showing confusion. The fall gave them another one. And now they have the legal documents they need to make it look like you're not competent to own your own home." My mouth was dry. "They're going to try to take my house." "They already tried," Carol said grimly. "And whatever Thomas interrupted this morning, whatever he told you to stay away from, I think they're trying again, right now." "Thomas didn't believe it was random," I said quietly. Carol leaned forward, her hands still wrapped around her cold tea. "What do you mean?" After Deputy Webb left that night, after I'd changed the locks and tried to convince myself it was just a burglary, Thomas called me. He wanted to know every detail, who I'd told about the trip, what was missing, everything. I remembered that phone call. I'd been sitting in my living room, the house still feeling strange and violated around me, when Thomas's name had lit up my phone screen. "Mom, I need you to do something for me." He'd said, his voice tight and focused. "Check the Ring doorbell camera. Go into the app and look at Friday night, around 9 o'clock. "Thomas, the police already." "Just do it, please." So I'd opened the app on my phone, my hands shaking slightly. The Ring camera I'd installed 6 months earlier, Thomas had convinced me to get it after package thefts in the neighborhood, faced the front walkway and captured the porch and driveway. I'd found the timestamp, Friday 9:07 p.m. The video was grainy black and white with that greenish night vision tint. I watched as a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver's side door opened and a figure stepped out tall, wearing dark clothing and a hooded sweatshirt pulled low. The person walked up my driveway, not toward the front door, but around the side of the house toward the back. They moved quickly, purposefully, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. 4 minutes later, they reappeared carrying what looked like a small bag or folder and climbed back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away, headlights cutting through the darkness. "Did you see it?" Thomas had asked when I called him back. "Yes, but I couldn't see their face, and the license plate is too blurry." "I know, I already watched it remotely from my laptop. Mom, that person didn't break in. They used a key." I'd felt my stomach drop. "What?" "Look again. When they go to the back door, there's no forced entry. No kicking, no prying. They opened it with a key, which means someone gave them access." Now, sitting in Carol's kitchen, I wrapped my arms around myself. Thomas sent the footage to Deputy Webb the next morning, but the license plate was too grainy to read and the person's face was completely covered. Webb said there wasn't enough for an arrest, but he'd keep the file open. "So Thomas couldn't prove it was Cameron," Carol said. "No, but he didn't stop there." I took a shaky breath. He started digging. He didn't tell me at the time. He said later he didn't want to worry me, but he started looking into Cameron's background. Public records, court filings, anything he could find online. Thomas had always been thorough, methodical. It was what made him good at his job. Software engineering required that kind of systematic thinking. And when he'd turned that focus on Cameron Hayes, he'd found something. "There were lawsuits," I said quietly. 3 of them, filed between August and September of this year. Former clients of Cameron's investment firm, all claiming he'd mismanaged their money, lost their retirement savings through bad investments and hidden fees. Carol's eyes widened. "How much?" $340,000 total across all 3 cases. The numbers felt surreal saying them out loud. One woman, a retired nurse, had lost her entire retirement fund. $120,000 gone. Thomas had shown me the court documents later after everything had come to light. I'd read the claims, the angry, desperate language of people who'd trusted Cameron with their life savings and watched it disappear. Cameron told these people their money was secure. I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. He showed them fake statements, doctored spreadsheets. And when they started asking questions, he stalled. Told them the market was volatile, that they needed to be patient. By the time they realized what was happening, their money was gone. "And he's being sued for all of it," Carol said. "Yes, but Thomas found something else." I looked down at my hands. Cameron's firm, it's not just civil lawsuits. There were complaints filed with the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions. An investigation was opened in September. If they find evidence of fraud, Cameron could face criminal charges, not just lawsuits, prison. Carol let out a slow breath. "So he's not just in debt. He's facing financial ruin and possibly jail time." I nodded. Thomas said Cameron probably has lawyers bleeding him dry. Legal fees, settlements if he loses the civil cases, fines from the state. And if the investigation goes federal, if they find he violated securities laws, it gets even worse. How much does he owe? Thomas estimated over $1 million. Between the lawsuits, the legal fees, and what he'd already lost in bad investments trying to cover his tracks. I felt sick saying it. Cameron is drowning. He's desperate. And desperate people do desperate things. Thomas didn't tell me any of this right away, I said. He found it all in October, right after the break-in. But he didn't want me to panic. He said he wanted to gather more information, first figure out what Christine and Cameron were planning. But he couldn't prove it. Carol said softly. "No, the video wasn't enough. And without a confession or a clear connection, Deputy Webb couldn't do anything. So Thomas just watched. He checked the camera footage every day from Seattle. He called me more often. He even drove down one weekend in late October, said he just wanted to visit, but I think he was checking on me, making sure I was safe. I remembered that visit. Thomas had walked through every room of the house, checking windows, testing locks, asking if I'd noticed anything unusual. At the time, I'd thought he was being overprotective. Now I realized he'd been terrified. He knew something was coming, I said. He just didn't know what. Carol's face was grim. She reached across the table and took my hands again, her grip firm and warm. "Barbara," she said, her voice steady and serious. "If Cameron is facing $1 million in debt and possible prison time, and if he thinks your house is the answer to his problems—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. I already knew. "They're desperate," I whispered. "They need money, a lot of it, fast. And your house is worth, what, $800,000 more?" I nodded. The last property assessment had valued it at $847,000. The house Robert and I had bought for $89,000 in 1987 had appreciated over the decades as Spokane's South Hill neighborhood had become more desirable. And Christine and Cameron wanted it. "They created a medical record to make me look incompetent," I said, my voice shaking. "They stole my title deed so they could forge documents, and now they're making their move." Carol finished. "Whatever Thomas saw this morning, whatever made him tell you not to come home, they're trying to take your house. Today." I looked out the window. The sun was fully up now, bright and clear. Somewhere across town at my house, the house Robert and I had built our life in, my daughter and her husband were trying to steal it. "They're going after my home," I whispered. Carol squeezed my hands. "But you're not there. Thomas made sure of that. You're safe here." "Last Friday night," I said, my voice barely steady. "October 25th, Thomas showed up at my door, unannounced." Carol's grip on my hands tightened. "What?" I was surprised, too. He doesn't usually drive down on a Friday. He works long hours, and the drive from Seattle is 4 hours. But there he was, standing on my porch around 8 o'clock, looking tense, but trying to smile. I'd been in the living room reading a book by the lamp when I'd heard his car pull into the driveway. I'd looked out the window and seen his silver Honda Civic, and my heart had jumped, not in fear, but in that instinctive worry a mother feels when her child shows up unexpectedly. I'd opened the door before he could knock. "Thomas, honey, what are you doing here?" He'd given me a quick hug, his arms tight around me for just a moment longer than usual. "Hey, Mom, sorry to drop by like this." I was thinking about that old project of Dad's, the bookshelf he never finished, and I realized I left some of my tools in the garage last time I was here. I need them for a project this weekend, so I figured I'd drive down and grab them. It had made sense at the time. Thomas was always working on something, building furniture, fixing electronics. He'd inherited Robert's love of working with his hands. "Of course," I'd said. "Come in. Have you eaten? I can make you something." "That'd be great, actually. I'm starving." So I'd gone into the kitchen, pulled out leftovers from the fridge, started heating up soup and slicing bread. Thomas had called out that he was going to use the restroom upstairs, and I'd heard his footsteps on the stairs. I hadn't thought anything of it, but he didn't go to the bathroom. I told Carol now. Or if he did, he stopped somewhere else first. He went into the den, the little office room where I keep my desk and filing cabinet. Carol's face was pale. "Barbara, there was a folder on my desk." I continued, my voice shaking. "A manila folder. I'd seen it there earlier that week. I thought it was something I'd left out, maybe old paperwork I needed to file away. I hadn't looked inside. I didn't think I needed to. But Thomas had looked. He'd told me later, much later, after everything had come to light, what he'd found inside that folder. He'd described it in careful, precise detail the way he always did when something was important. The first document had been a power of attorney, legal-sized paper typed and official-looking with Barbara Thornton's name at the top. It granted full financial authority to Christine Thornton Hayes, allowing her to access bank accounts, sell property, make medical decisions, everything. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't. Thomas had recognized that immediately. He'd seen my signature hundreds of times on birthday cards, on his college loan paperwork, on the title to his first car. The signature on that power of attorney was similar but wrong. The loops were different. The pressure of the pen was uneven. Someone had tried to forge my handwriting. The document was dated September 15th, 2023, 6 weeks ago. The second document had been a receipt, $15,000 paid to Cascade Senior Living on October 15th, 2023, a deposit to secure a room in their memory care unit. The payer's name, Christine Thornton Hayes. The third had been a draft listing agreement for my house, 2847 South Grand Boulevard, Spokane, Washington. Proposed listing, price $899,000. Agent Christine Thornton Hayes, licensed real estate broker. The fourth had been a handwritten note scrawled on a yellow sticky note in Christine's distinctive handwriting. Thomas had recognized it instantly, the way she looped her capital T's, the way her Y's curved. Tuesday, October 29th, 6 a.m. Movers arrive. Mom to Cascade by 10 a.m. And the fifth document, the one that had made Thomas's blood run cold, had been a medical assessment, printed on official-looking letterhead doctor. Richard Morrison, M.D. Geriatric Psychiatry, Spokane Medical Associates. The report was dated September 20th, 2023. It stated in clinical language that Barbara Thornton, age 65, had been evaluated and found to exhibit signs of early-stage cognitive decline, memory lapses, confusion with medications, difficulty managing daily tasks. The assessment concluded that she was unsafe to live independently and required supervised care in a memory facility. I'd never met Dr. Richard Morrison. I'd never been evaluated for dementia. I'd never set foot in Spokane Medical Associates. The entire document was fake. Thomas took pictures of everything. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He used his phone. He photographed every page, every signature, every note. Then he put the folder back exactly where he'd found it. Carol's hand was over her mouth. He didn't tell you? No. He came back downstairs, ate the soup I'd made, talked about work and the weather and nothing important. He hugged me goodbye, said he'd call me on Sunday, and then he left. But he hadn't gone home. Thomas had driven to a coffee shop downtown parked under a streetlight and called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, an elder law attorney named Edward Klein, someone whose name Thomas had found during his research into Cameron's lawsuits. Klein specialized in protecting seniors from financial abuse from scams and fraud and family members who tried to exploit them. Thomas had explained what he'd found. Klein had listened, asked questions, told Thomas to send him the photos immediately. This is elder abuse. Klein had said, his voice calm but firm over the phone. Forged power of attorney, fake medical assessment plans to move her into a facility against her will and sell her house. This is textbook financial exploitation, and it's a felony in Washington state. Thomas had asked what they should do. We wait, Klein had said. If they're planning to move her on Tuesday, we have 4 days. We file an emergency injunction with the court on Monday, get a judge to freeze any transactions on the property. We contact law enforcement. And on Tuesday morning, when they show up with the moving truck, we stop them. But what about my mom? Thomas had asked. What if they try to take her before Tuesday? What if they hurt her? We make sure she's not there, Klein had said. On Tuesday morning, you get her out of that house. You call her early, you tell her to go somewhere safe, and then we catch them in the act. Thomas didn't tell me any of this until this morning. I said, tears streaming down my face now. He didn't want to scare me. He didn't want me to confront Christine or do anything that might tip them off, so he just waited. He coordinated with the lawyer. He prepared everything. And this morning at 6:28, he called me and told me not to come home. Carol's face was ashen. Because today is Tuesday, October 29th. I nodded, unable to speak. Barbara. Carol said, her voice shaking. They were going to take you this morning. They were going to move you into that facility, sell your house, and make it look like you'd agreed to everything. Yes, I whispered. If Thomas hadn't found that folder, if he hadn't called you this morning, I'd be gone, I said. My voice broke. They'd have me locked in a memory care unit telling everyone I have dementia and my house would be on the market by tomorrow. Carol pulled me into her arms and I sobbed into her shoulder. The weight of it, the betrayal, the cruelty, the meticulous planning crashed over me like a wave. My daughter had planned to erase me, to lock me away, take my home, steal my life. And today was the day she'd planned to do it. It's happening right now, I choked out. Right now at my house, they're trying to... But you're not there, Carol said fiercely, pulling back to look me in the face. You're here. Thomas got you out. You're safe. I wanted to believe her. But as I looked out the window at the bright October morning, all I could think was, what's happening at my house right now? Saturday morning. I said, wiping tears with the back of my hand. Thomas drove to meet the lawyer. Carol handed me a tissue. Her face was still pale. Edward Klein. I continued, voice hoarse. That's the attorney's name. Thomas found him during his research. Klein specializes in elder law, protecting seniors from financial abuse, estate fraud. His office is here in Spokane, downtown on Riverside Avenue. Thomas had told me all of this later, filling in the gaps of those 4 days. At the time, that Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I'd been going about my normal routine watering roses, reading books, completely unaware that my son was building a legal case to save my life. Thomas had arrived at Klein's office at 9 Saturday morning. The building was old brick, downtown renovated, but still carrying history's weight. Klein's office was on the 3rd floor, wood-paneled walls, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk that looked decades old. Edward Klein was in his early 50s, Thomas said. Tall, graying hair, sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been an elder law attorney for 20 years, had handled hundreds of cases involving financial exploitation forged documents. He knew what he was looking at the moment Thomas showed him the photos. "Show me everything," Klein had said, gesturing to his laptop. Thomas had pulled up the photos on his phone, then connected to Klein's laptop. One by one, Klein examined each document, his face growing grimmer. The power of attorney was first. Klein had pulled up Robert's will, filed with Spokane County in 2019, leaving everything to me. He zoomed in on my signature at the bottom, then placed it side by side with the forged POA. "Look at this," Klein had said, pointing. "The signature on the will that's your mother's actual signature. See how the B in Barbara has a distinctive loop here? The way the T in Thornton crosses slightly upward, that's consistent handwriting." He pointed to the POA. "Now look at this. The B is flatter, less confident. The T crosses downward instead of up. The pen pressure is uneven, like someone was copying rather than signing naturally. This is a forgery." Thomas had felt cold satisfaction hearing that confirmation. "And the notary." Klein continued scrolling to the bottom where the notary's seal appeared. "Jennifer Caldwell, commissioned notary public for Washington State. Let's check if she exists." He'd opened a browser window, navigated to the Washington State Department of Licensing Notary database, typed in the name. No results found. "There's no notary by that name registered in Washington," Klein said flatly. "This entire document is fraudulent. Using a fake notary seal is a separate crime." Then Klein moved to the medical assessment. "Dr. Richard Morrison." Klein read aloud, "Geriatric Psychiatry, Spokane Medical Associates. Let's see if he's real." Another browser window, Washington Medical Commission website. Klein typed the name hit search. No results found. "There's no licensed physician named Richard Morrison practicing in Washington State," Klein said. "Not in Spokane, not anywhere. Either this person isn't a doctor or they're practicing without a license. Either way, this assessment is worthless. And if someone paid this person to write a fake report..." He paused. "That's fraud, a serious crime." Thomas asked what they should do. Klein leaned back, fingers steepled. "Based on what you've shown me, your sister and brother-in-law are planning elder financial abuse. They've forged legal documents, created a fake medical assessment, paid a deposit to a memory care facility, and plan to forcibly move your mother and sell her house without consent. In Washington State, that's a Class B felony. If convicted, they're looking at up to 10 years in prison and a $50,000 fine." Thomas's chest had tightened. 10 years. "Here's what we're going to do," Klein continued. "Monday morning, I'm filing an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction with Spokane County Superior Court. We'll ask the judge to freeze any transactions related to your mother's property. No sales, no transfers, nothing. The judge will review the evidence, these forged documents, the fake medical assessment, and if he agrees there's a credible threat, he'll sign the order." "What about the police?" "I'm going to contact Deputy Marcus Webb. He handled the break-in investigation at your mother's house 2 weeks ago." Thomas nodded. "Good. He'll be familiar with the situation. I'll send him these photos, explain what's happening. Webb can coordinate with the prosecutor's office. And on Tuesday morning..." Klein paused. "When your sister and brother-in-law show up with that moving truck, we need law enforcement there to stop them." "But what about my mom?" Thomas asked, voice tight. "If they show up and she's there..." "That's why your mother cannot be at that house Tuesday morning," Klein said firmly. "You need to get her out. Call her early before 6. Tell her to go somewhere safe, a friend's house, anywhere. Don't tell her why. If she confronts your sister beforehand, they'll abort the plan and we'll lose our chance to catch them. Thomas had understood, the hardest part keeping me in the dark. This is elder abuse, Klein had said. Your sister and brother-in-law are trying to steal your mother's home, her autonomy, her life. We're going to stop them. So Thomas coordinated everything. I said to Carol, now voice shaking. All weekend, all day Monday. Klein filed the injunction. Deputy Webb prepared to be there Tuesday morning. Thomas called me Sunday night just to check in, asked how I was. I said everything was fine. I had no idea he was preparing for this. Carol's grip on my hands was fierce. Barbara, your son saved you. If he hadn't found that folder— I know, I whispered. But Carol, I didn't know. All weekend, I was living my normal life, and my daughter was planning to have me locked up, and Thomas was carrying all of that alone. He was protecting you, Carol said softly. He was terrified, I said. He told me this morning he barely slept all weekend, kept checking the camera footage, worrying Christine and Cameron would show up early. He said the hardest thing was calling me Sunday night and pretending everything was normal. My throat tightened. My son had carried this burden alone for 4 days. This morning, I said, when Thomas called at 6:28 and told me not to come home, that was the first I'd heard of any of it. He didn't tell me about the folder, the lawyer, the injunction. He just said, don't come home, and I trusted him. Because he's never let you down, Carol said. I nodded, tears streaming. Never. Carol pulled me into her arms. They were ready, she murmured. Thomas and that lawyer, they were ready to catch them. They had the evidence, the legal protection, the police. But I wasn't, I whispered. Until this morning, I didn't even know I needed to be saved. Thomas didn't come back to Spokane until Monday night, I said quietly. Carol's eyes widened. He stayed in Seattle. Yes, he worked from home Sunday and Monday. He said he needed to keep his routine normal in case Christine or Cameron were watching. But he wasn't idle. Sunday morning, October 27th, Edward Klein filed the emergency motion with Spokane County Superior Court. It was a weekend, but Washington State has duty judges on call for urgent situations, domestic violence, emergency custody threats to vulnerable adults. The duty judge that Sunday was Judge Patricia Hernandez, a veteran of family court. Klein submitted the motion electronically, along with all the evidence, the forged power of attorney fake medical assessment, the handwritten note detailing the plan to move me Tuesday morning. Judge Hernandez reviewed the documents within 2 hours. Then she signed the order. Temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. Barbara Thornton versus Christine Thornton Hayes and Cameron Hayes. The order prohibited Christine Cameron or anyone acting on their behalf from selling, transferring, or encumbering the property at 2847 South Grand Boulevard. It prohibited them from removing me against my will. It prohibited them from accessing my bank accounts or making financial decisions on my behalf. Violation would be contempt of court. Klein called Thomas Sunday afternoon. We're locked and loaded, he'd said. Your mother's property is protected. Now we just need to catch them trying to violate the order. That same Sunday, Deputy Marcus Webb called Valley Moving Services the company Christine had hired. This is Deputy Webb's Spokane County Sheriff's Office, he'd said to the manager. I need to talk about a job you have scheduled Tuesday morning, 2847 South Grand Boulevard. The manager, a man named Frank, pulled up the work order. Yeah, we've got that. 6 a.m. start, full house move. Customer is Christine Hayes. When your crew shows up Tuesday, I need them to wait. Don't start loading until I arrive. This is part of an elder financial abuse investigation. Frank went quiet, then, You're saying this move isn't legit? The homeowner, Barbara Thornton, has not consented. Her daughter is attempting to remove her using forged legal documents. Jesus, Frank muttered. Yeah, okay, I'll tell my crew. They'll wait for you. One more piece in place. Monday, October 28th, the day before. I'd woken up with no idea it was my last normal day. The weather had been cool and clear, the kind of October day that makes you glad to be alive. I'd made coffee, read the newspaper, spent an hour in the garden. The Trust Your Heart rose bush, the one Robert had planted, had 3 late blooms still clinging. I'd stood there just looking at them, thinking about him. Around noon, I'd made split pea soup, Robert's favorite. frozen half-eaten a bowl by the window while watching birds. It had been peaceful, quiet, normal. Then around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Christine. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was bright, cheerful. Too cheerful, I realize now. "How are you?" "I'm fine, honey. How are you?" "Good, good. Just busy. Hey, I was calling to check in. What are you up to?" "Oh, garden work, reading." "That's nice." A pause. Then carefully casual, "So are you home tomorrow morning? I was thinking maybe I'd stop by later this week." "Tomorrow morning, yes, I'll be home. I'm always home in the mornings." "Great, okay, just wanted to make sure. Love you, Mom." "Love you too." She'd hung up. I'd set the phone down, feeling a small flutter of unease. Christine rarely called just to chat, and the question about tomorrow morning had felt pointed, but I'd pushed it away. She's just being thoughtful, I'd told myself. God, I'd been so naive. What I didn't know, what Thomas told me later, was that Christine had been making final preparations all day Monday. She'd confirmed the reservation at Cascade Senior Living, called to say I'd be arriving Tuesday around 10. "My mother is very confused," she'd told them. "She may be resistant, but we have all the legal paperwork, power of attorney medical assessment." She'd packed boxes at her house, my things she'd already taken during previous visits. Photographs, jewelry, things she thought I wouldn't notice. She was going to bring them to Cascade to make my room familiar. She and Cameron had gone over the plan Monday evening. Moving truck at 6. They'd arrive at 6:15. By 7, I'd be in the car heading to Cascade. By 8, the house would be empty. By 9, the listing agreement signed. By noon Tuesday, my life would be gone. They had no idea Klein had filed an injunction. No idea Webb was coordinating with the movers. No idea Thomas was preparing to drive through the night. They thought they'd won. Thomas had left Seattle at 10 Monday night. He'd packed a bag change of clothes, phone charger, printed evidence Klein had prepared. He'd filled his gas tank, bought coffee, and started the drive over the Cascades. 4 hours in the dark. 4 hours going over every scenario. What if Christine showed up early? What if they tried to take me before Webb arrived? He'd told me it was the longest drive of his life. He'd arrived in Spokane around 2 Tuesday morning, but he hadn't come to my house. He'd parked 2 blocks away on a side street where he could see my driveway. He'd reclined his seat, pulled a blanket over himself, tried to rest. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that yellow, sticky note. Tuesday, October 29th, 6 a.m. Movers arrive. He'd checked the Ring camera on his phone every 15 minutes. My house stayed dark and quiet. At 5:30, he'd seen my bedroom light come on. I was awake, starting my normal routine unaware. At 6:15, he'd seen the moving truck turn onto South Grand Boulevard. And at 6:28, he'd called me. 1 hour ago. I said now, looking at Carol's kitchen clock. It was 7:30. Thomas called me 1 hour ago. Carol's hand tightened on mine. And right now, right this moment, what's happening at your house? I looked out the window at the bright October sky. Somewhere across town at 2847 South Grand Boulevard, my daughter was trying to steal my life. "I don't know," I whispered. Thomas said he'd call when it was over, but I don't know what's happening right now. Carol stood up, still holding my hand. "Then I think it's time we found out." I took a shaky breath and looked at Carol. "Let me tell you exactly what happened this morning." Carol sat back down, her hand still holding mine across the table. The clock on her kitchen wall read 8:35. 2.5 hours since Thomas had called. 2.5 hours since my life had changed forever. "I need you to understand," I said. "When I woke up this morning, I had no idea. None." 6 o'clock, Tuesday, October 29th. I'd opened my eyes to the dim gray light filtering through my bedroom curtains. The digital clock on my nightstand had glowed green. 6 a.m. Outside, Spokane was still mostly dark, that soft pre-dawn darkness of late October, when the world holds its breath before sunrise. I'd gotten out of bed, pulled on my robe, padded downstairs to the kitchen. The house had been quiet around me, the familiar creak of the stairs under my feet, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the tick of Robert's old clock in the hallway. All the sounds of home. I'd made coffee, measured the grounds, filled the water reservoir, pressed the button. While it brewed, I'd stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard. The rose garden was barely visible in the dim light, the last blooms clinging to Robert's "Trust Your Heart" bush. It had felt like any other morning. What I didn't know, what Thomas told me later, was that at that exact moment he was sitting in his car 2 blocks away, watching my house through the pre-dawn darkness. He'd been awake all night. His back ached from sleeping in the reclined seat. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he hadn't moved. He'd been watching the Ring camera feed on his phone, watching my bedroom light come on at 5:30, watching the kitchen light follow at 6, watching and waiting. 6:15. I'd poured my coffee, added cream, carried it to the kitchen table. I'd been about to sit down when I'd glanced at the microwave clock. 6:15 a.m. In that moment, 2 blocks away, Thomas had seen something that made his heart stop. A white moving truck, Valley Moving Services, printed on the side in blue letters, had turned onto South Grand Boulevard. It was early, the job wasn't supposed to start until 6:30. But there, it was pulling up to the curb in front of my house. Thomas had grabbed his phone and called Deputy Webb. "They're early," he'd said, his voice tight. "The moving truck just arrived. Are you close?" 10 minutes out, Webb had replied. "Stall them if you can. Don't let them start loading." But Thomas couldn't stall them. He wasn't supposed to be there. If Christine or Cameron saw him, they'd know something was wrong. So he'd done the only thing he could do. He'd called me. 6:28. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, when my phone had buzzed on the counter. The sudden sound in the quiet kitchen had startled me. I'd set down my cup and walked over to pick it up. Thomas's name on the screen. My heart had jumped. Thomas didn't call at 6:30 in the morning unless something was wrong. I'd answered, "Thomas. Mom." His voice had been low, urgent, controlled, but barely. "Listen carefully. Don't come home today." I'd frozen the phone pressed to my ear. "What?" "I can't explain right now. I need you to trust me. Get in your car and go to Carol's house. Don't ask questions. Just go. Please." "Thomas, you're scaring me. What's happening?" "I'll explain later, I promise. But right now, you need to leave. Don't go back to the house. Go to Carol's. Can you do that for me?" My hand had been shaking. Outside the window, a car door had slammed somewhere down the block. The neighbor's dog had barked once. "Yes," I'd whispered. "I can do that." "Good. I love you, Mom." The line had gone dead. I'd stood there in my kitchen, our kitchen, and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Thomas's voice had been terrified, and Thomas didn't scare easily. But I'd trusted him. I'd always trusted him. So I'd moved. I'd grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, my keys, my jacket. My hands had been shaking so badly I'd barely been able to zip the coat. I'd walked out through the back door. Something in me hadn't wanted to look at the front of the house, hadn't wanted to see whatever Thomas didn't want me to see. The air outside had been cold sharp with that October morning chill that smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke. Frost had settled on my windshield overnight. I'd scraped it off with trembling fingers, climbed into my Honda Accord. The leather seats had been freezing. The engine had turned over with a low rumble. I'd backed out of the driveway, my heart pounding, and turned left onto South Grand Boulevard. As I'd driven away, I'd seen it in my rearview mirror, a white truck parked at the curb in front of my house, and beyond it, a black SUV pulling up behind. But I hadn't stopped. I'd kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel, Thomas's words echoing in my head. "Don't come home, just go." 6:35. By the time I'd reached Carol's house 10 minutes away, though it had felt like hours, Christine and Cameron had arrived at my home. Thomas had watched from his car as they'd climbed out of their SUV. Christine in business clothes carrying a leather folder. Cameron in a suit looking confident and composed. They'd walked up the driveway together, not toward the front door, but around to the side toward the back where they had a key. Thomas had gotten out of his car, then staying back, but close enough to watch. He'd pulled out his phone and started recording video. The moving crew, 3 men in Valley Moving uniforms, had been standing by their truck, waiting. The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, had approached Christine. "Ms. Hayes, we're ready to start, but we were told to wait for law enforcement. Deputy Webb called us yesterday." Christine's face had gone white. "What Deputy Webb? Why would—" "Ma'am, there's some question about whether this move is authorized." Cameron had stepped forward, his voice smooth, confident. "There's been a misunderstanding. We have all the legal documentation. My mother-in-law has dementia. She's not competent to live alone. We have power of attorney. Everything is in order. The foreman had looked uncomfortable. "I'm sure it is, sir, but my instructions are to wait for the deputy before we start loading." Christine had turned to Cameron, her voice rising. "This doesn't make sense. How would the police even know?" And that's when she'd seen him, Thomas. Standing on the sidewalk 50 feet away, his phone held up recording everything. Thomas. Her voice had been sharp, confused. "What are you doing here?" Thomas had walked toward them slowly, his phone still recording. "Stopping you," he'd said quietly. "And that's when I got to Carol's house," I said now, my voice shaking. "That's when Carol opened the door and asked me what happened. And I didn't know. I didn't know any of this was happening." Carol's face was pale. "Barbara, Thomas called me at 6:28. I said, looking at the clock again. 8:37 now. That was 2 hours and 9 minutes ago, and I still don't know what's happening at my house right now. Thomas said he'd call when it was over, but he hasn't called." I looked at Carol, tears burning in my eyes. What if something went wrong? What if Christine or Cameron... My phone rang. The sound cut through the kitchen like a knife. I grabbed it from the table, nearly dropping it in my haste. Thomas's name on the screen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe to answer. Thomas. "Mom." His voice was steady, now tired but steady. "It's over. You can come home. If you're still here, comment 1, so I know you're still with me on this. And if you were in my place in that moment, would you go back and face everything or walk away to protect yourself? I really want to know what you would choose. Also, please note the next part of the story includes some fictional elements added for depth and reflection. If you prefer not to continue, you can stop watching here. "What happened?" Carol asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At your house. What happened after you left?" I set my phone down on the table, my hand still shaking. "Thomas told me. Just now on the phone. He told me everything." Carol's grip on my other hand tightened. "Tell me." I took a shaky breath. "After I drove away after I got here, Christine and Cameron went into my house. They used the key Christine has, and they tried to take everything. 7 o'clock, 1 hour after I'd left. Thomas had been watching from his car as Christine and Cameron had walked up my driveway. He told me later that Christine had been carrying a leather folder, the one with all the forged documents, and Cameron had been on his phone probably coordinating with Cascade Senior Living. They'd gone straight to the back door. Christine had pulled out her key, unlocked it, and walked in like she owned the place, like it was already hers. Thomas had stayed back his phone recording everything, but close enough to hear when Christine came back outside and approached the moving crew. "Gentlemen," she'd said, her voice bright and professional. "Thank you for waiting. We can start now. Let's begin with the living room, furniture, sofa, chairs, the television stand. Everything goes into storage unit 247 at Public Storage on North Division." The foreman, a man named Steve Thomas, said middle-aged with a weathered face, had stepped forward, his clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, where's the homeowner? We usually need them present for a move like this." Christine had smiled, that practiced real estate agent smile. "My mother isn't able to be here. She's not well. I have power of attorney." She'd opened the leather folder and pulled out the forged document. "Everything is in order. I'm authorized to act on her behalf." Steve had taken the document, scanned it briefly, then looked back at Christine. His expression had been uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I appreciate that. But yesterday I received a call from Deputy Webb with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. He instructed us not to begin loading until law enforcement arrives on scene." Christine's smile had frozen. "What Deputy Webb? I don't understand. Why would—" "He said this move is part of an ongoing investigation," Steve had continued. "Something about elder financial abuse. He asked us to cooperate fully and not remove anything from the property until he arrives." Cameron had stepped forward, then his voice smooth but with an edge underneath. "This is ridiculous. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. My wife has full legal authority here. Her mother has dementia, early-stage cognitive decline. We're moving her into Cascade Senior Living for her own safety. Everything is documented." Steve had held his ground. "I'm sure it is, sir. But my instructions are clear. We wait for the deputy." That's when Cameron's phone had rung. Thomas had seen Cameron's face change as he'd answered the call, seen the confidence drain away, replaced by something cold and tight. "This is Cameron Hayes," he'd said into the phone. The voice on the other end had been Edward Klein. "Mr. Hayes, this is Edward Klein, attorney at law. I'm calling to inform you that an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction was filed on Sunday with Spokane County Superior Court. The motion was granted. As of Sunday afternoon, you and Christine Thornton Hayes are prohibited from selling, transferring, or encumbering the property located at 2847 South Grand Boulevard. You are also prohibited from removing Barbara Thornton from her home against her will or accessing her financial accounts without her explicit consent. Violation of this order constitutes contempt of court. Do you understand what I'm telling you, Mr. Hayes?" Cameron's face had gone white. "Who is this? How did you—" "I represent Mrs. Barbara Thornton." Klein had continued, his voice calm and precise. "And I'm also calling to let you know that Deputy Webb will be arriving at the property shortly to ensure compliance with the court order. I suggest you and your wife cooperate fully." The line had gone dead. Cameron had stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, his hand shaking slightly. Christine had turned to him. What is it?" "There's an injunction," Cameron had said, his voice barely audible. "The court, they know. Someone filed an injunction." Christine's face had drained of color. "That's impossible. How would anyone even—" "I don't know," Cameron had snapped. "But they know. The lawyer said Deputy Webb is on his way here." That's when Christine had seen him. Thomas, standing on the sidewalk, his phone held up, recording everything. "Thomas." Her voice had been sharp, rising. "What are you doing here? How did you—" And then Deputy Webb's patrol car had turned onto South Grand Boulevard, lights flashing but no siren. Right behind it, a silver sedan. Edward Klein's car. Thomas had walked toward them as Webb and Klein had climbed out of their vehicles. He'd kept his phone recording, kept his expression neutral, even though his heart had been pounding. "Thomas," Christine had said again, her voice cracking now. "Please, you don't understand. Mom is sick. She's confused. We're trying to help her, say it." "She's not confused," Thomas had said quietly. His voice had been steady cold. "And she's not here." Christine had looked around wildly, as if she'd just realized I wasn't in the house. "Where is she, Thomas? Where is Mom?" "Somewhere safe," Thomas had said. "Somewhere you can't get to her." Deputy Webb had approached then, his hand resting casually on his belt, his expression professional and unreadable. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Thornton Hayes, I'm Deputy Marcus Webb. I need to speak with both of you about some documents that have been brought to my attention." Edward Klein had stepped forward, carrying his leather briefcase. He'd looked exactly how Thomas had described him. Tall, graying hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who radiated quiet authority. "I'm Edward Klein, attorney for Mrs. Barbara Thornton," he'd said. "I have copies of the court's injunction order here, as well as evidence that the power of attorney you're carrying, Miss Thornton Hayes, is a forgery." Christine had gone very still. "That's not true. That's my mother's signature." "It's not," Klein had said flatly. He'd opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 sheets of paper. "This is your mother's actual signature from her late husband's will, filed with the county in 2019. He'd held up 1 sheet. "And this is the signature on the power of attorney you're attempting to use." He'd held up the other. "They're not the same. A forensic handwriting analyst will confirm that in approximately 48 hours, but even a casual comparison shows clear discrepancies. This document is forged, and forgery is a felony in Washington state." Christine had shaken her head, backing away. No, this is a mistake. We were trying to help her. She's not safe living alone." The doctor said, "Dr. Richard Morrison," Klein had interrupted. "The physician whose assessment you're using to justify this move, there is no licensed doctor by that name in Washington state. The medical assessment is fake. The power of attorney is forged. And you are currently in violation of a court order." Christine's legs had seemed to give out. She'd sunk down onto the porch steps, her face in her hands. Cameron had turned to run. Deputy Webb had moved faster than Thomas had expected, stepping into Cameron's path. "Sir, I wouldn't recommend leaving right now. We have some questions for both of you." That's when Thomas had called me. 8 o'clock in the morning, standing in front of my house watching Christine cry on the porch steps and Cameron stare at the ground, his fists clenched. "Mom," Thomas had said into the phone, "it's over. You can come home." "And that's where we are now," I said to Carol, my voice shaking. Thomas said Deputy Webb wants to talk to me, to get my statement about everything, the medication, the fall, the break-in, all of it. And Christine, I stopped, my throat closing up. "Christine is still there?" Carol asked gently. I nodded. Thomas said she's sitting on my porch, crying. She hasn't said anything since Edward Klein told her the documents were forged. She just broke down. Carol stood up, still holding my hand. "Then we need to get you home." I looked at her fear and something else, something harder, sharper, rising in my chest. "I don't know if I can face her. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Carol said firmly. "You just have to be there. You just have to stand in your own house and show her that she didn't win." I took a shaky breath. "Will you come with me?" "Of course," Carol said. "I'm not letting you do this alone." Carol drove. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded, watching familiar Spokane streets pass by. The October morning was bright and clear, the kind of day that should have felt hopeful. But all I felt was cold dread. "You don't have to do this right now," Carol said gently. "We can wait." "No," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "I need to face her." Carol squeezed my hand briefly. We turned onto South Grand Boulevard, my breath caught. 3 vehicles parked in front of my house. Deputy Webb's patrol car, Edward Klein's silver sedan, Thomas's Honda. The moving truck was gone. My house looked the same, the craftsman porch, rose garden oak tree Robert had planted. But it didn't feel the same. It felt violated. Carol pulled into the driveway. We sat in silence. "Ready?" she asked. I wasn't, but I nodded. Thomas was waiting at the front door. He came down the steps and wrapped me in his arms. "Mom," he said, voice thick. "You're okay. You're safe." I held on to him. "I'm okay," I whispered. Carol stood beside us, hand on my shoulder. Thomas pulled back. "Are you sure you want to do this? You don't have to go in." "I need to," I said. "This is my house." He nodded, took my hand, led me up the porch steps. Carol followed. Inside smelled the same coffee old wood faint scent of Robert's workshop, but the atmosphere was heavy. In the living room, Christine and Cameron sat on the sofa. Christine's face was blotchy, mascara smeared. She'd been crying. Cameron stared at the floor, hands clenched. Neither looked up when I walked in. Edward Klein stood by the coffee table briefcase, open papers spread across the surface. Deputy Webb stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Klein looked up. "Mrs. Thornton," he said gently, "thank you for coming. I know this is difficult." I nodded, throat too tight. Carol stood beside me. Thomas moved to my other side. "I want to walk you through what we've found," Klein said, "so you understand the full scope." I looked at Christine. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Klein gestured to the table. "This is the power of attorney Ms. Thornton Hayes presented this morning." He held up one sheet. "And this is your signature from your late husband's will, filed in 2019. He laid them side by side. Even from where I stood, I could see the difference. "The signature is forged," Klein said flatly. "A forensic analyst will confirm this within 48 hours. He picked up another document. "The notary listed is Jennifer Caldwell, supposedly a commissioned notary for Washington State. I checked the database. There is no notary by that name." Cameron shifted but said nothing. Klein picked up the medical assessment. "This report, signed by Dr. Richard Morrison, claims you exhibit cognitive decline and are unsafe to live independently." He paused, eyes moving to Cameron. "There is no licensed physician named Richard Morrison in Washington, so I did some digging." Klein pulled out an email printout. It turns out Richard Morrison, or rather Rick Morrison, is a 43-year-old sales associate at a furniture store in Seattle. He attended the University of Washington from 2000 to 2004, where he met Cameron Hayes, same business program. My stomach dropped. "Yesterday afternoon," Klein continued, "I contacted Mr. Rick Morrison. I explained he could be charged with practicing medicine without a license, a Class C felony. He was Cooperative. Klein held up the email. This is from Cameron Hayes to Rick Morrison, September 15th. Subject, quick job, 8,000 cash. Body says, quote, need you to sign a medical form as doctor. Richard Morrison, just your name and credentials. Make it look official. No one will check. $8,000 cash when it's done. The room went quiet. Mr. Morrison has provided copies of this email text messages and a signed statement admitting he signed the assessment despite having no medical training. He was paid $8,000 cash by Mr. Hayes on September 22nd. I looked at Cameron. His face was white, hands shaking. Mr. Morrison will be charged with fraud and practicing without a license, Klein continued. But his cooperation will be valuable in prosecuting you, Mr. Hayes, and Ms. Thornton Hayes. Deputy Webb stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, Miss. Thornton Hayes, you are both under formal investigation by the Spokane County Sheriff's Office and the Washington State Attorney General for elder financial abuse, forgery, and fraud. These are Class B felonies. If convicted, you face up to 10 years in prison and a $50,000 fine per count. Cameron stood suddenly. We're leaving. Webb's voice was calm. Sir, I strongly advise you to sit down. If you attempt to leave, I will place you under arrest for obstruction. Cameron stood jaw-clenched, fists shaking, then slowly he sank back. You are not under arrest at this time, Webb continued, but you are not free to leave Washington State. Your passports have been flagged. Do you understand? Cameron didn't answer. Christine sobbed. I'd been standing there, silent, taking it in. The forged signature. The fake notary. The friend Cameron paid $8,000 to pretend to be a doctor. All of it planned, all deliberate. I looked at my daughter, at Christine, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd cheered for the woman I'd danced with at her wedding. Finally, she looked at me. Her face was streaked with tears, eyes red and swollen. She looked broken. Christine, I said, voice barely above a whisper, look at me. She did. How could you? I asked. Voice cracked. How could you do this to me? She opened her mouth, just a sob. I'm your mother. I said, tears streaming. I gave you life. I raised you. I loved you. And you tried to lock me away. You tried to steal my home. You tried to erase me. Mom, she choked. No, I said, voice stronger. You don't get to call me that. Not right now. Not after this. Christine buried her face in her hands and wept. And I stood there in my living room, our living room, and felt my heart break all over again. Christine's voice cracked. Mom, please, I never meant to hurt you. We were just what? I cut her off, and the sharpness in my own voice startled me. I had spent 65 years being a mother, a wife, a neighbor who baked casseroles and watered the roses Robert planted. But in that moment, standing in my living room with the morning light slanting through the lace curtains, I felt something harden inside me, something I had never allowed myself to feel toward my own daughter, anger. Christine sat on the sofa beside Cameron, her face blotchy and wet. Cameron stared at the floor, his hands clenched between his knees. Thomas stood at my shoulder, solid and steady. Carol hovered near the doorway, her expression unreadable. Deputy Webb leaned against the mantel, arms folded, watching. Edward Klein had taken a seat in Robert's old armchair, his leather folder open on his lap pen, poised. I took a breath and let the words come slow and deliberate. You switched my medication labels in July, I said. If Carol hadn't caught it, I could have had a heart episode or crashed the car. That was your first attempt. Christine opened her mouth, but I raised one hand. In September, you invited me to dinner and made sure the stairs were slippery. I fell 3 steps and ended up in the emergency room with bruises and a shoulder I still can't raise all the way. You told the doctor I was confused. You created a medical record that made me look incompetent. Cameron's jaw tightened. Christine's tears came faster. 2 weeks ago, someone broke into my house while I was in Seattle. They didn't take the television or the laptop. They took my house, deed my insurance papers, my jewelry, things you needed to fake documents. George Wilson saw a black SUV parked out front that night. A black SUV just like yours, Cameron. Cameron flinched but said nothing. I turned my gaze to Christine, and for a moment I saw her as she had been 30 years ago, a girl with tangled braids and scraped knees. running through the backyard sprinkler on a hot August afternoon. I remembered the way she used to hold my hand when we walked to Lincoln Elementary, the way her voice had trembled with pride when she gave the valedictorian speech at her high school graduation in 2003, her mortarboard crooked on her head. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinners when she carved the turkey with Robert laughing as he corrected her knife angle. I remembered believing she would always be my little girl, but that girl was gone. You forged my signature on a power of attorney. I continued, my voice steady. You hired a fake doctor to write a report saying I had cognitive decline. You put a deposit on a nursing home without my knowledge. You scheduled movers to come this morning at 6 o'clock to empty my house and take me away so you could sell it and pocket the money. Christine buried her face in her hands. Mom, we owe over $1 million. Cameron's clients sued him. We're going to lose everything. I didn't know what else to do. So you decided to steal my life. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. You decided your mother's home, the house your father and I bought in 1987 when you were 2 years old, was yours to take. I thought, Christine's voice broke. I thought we could take care of you at Cascade. I thought it would be better for you. You thought nothing of the sort. My tone was ice now. You thought about money. You thought about your debts. You thought about yourselves. I glanced at Thomas, whose face was pale and tight. He had spent the past 4 days uncovering this scheme, driving through the night, coordinating with a lawyer and a deputy sheriff, all to protect me. He had done what a son should do. Christine had done the opposite. I looked back at her, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to see the pattern clearly. The loans she never repaid. The credit cards she opened in my name during her 20s, the ones Robert quietly paid off to protect my credit. The requests for help with rent, with car payments, with Christine's real estate licensing fees, each promise to pay me back dissolving into silence. Robert had called it enabling. I had called it being a mother. Now I understood I had been funding her entitlement for decades. I loved you, I said, quietly. I gave you everything I could, but you tried to take the one thing I had left: my home, my independence, my dignity. You tried to lock me away and pretend I was incapable so you could profit from my absence. Christine sobbed. Cameron finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Barbara, if we could just... No, I said. You don't get to talk to me. You've said enough with your actions. I turned to Edward Klein. I want to press charges, all of them. Klein nodded and made a note. Elder financial abuse, forgery, fraud, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. We'll file first thing tomorrow morning. Deputy Webb stepped forward. Mrs. Thornton, I want you to know we're treating this as a priority case. We've already begun building the file. The district attorney's office will be in touch within 48 hours. Christine looked up, her eyes wild. Mom, please don't do this. I'm your daughter. Yes, I said, and my voice wavered for the first time. You are, and that's what makes this so unbearable. I felt Thomas's hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. I felt Carol's presence at my side. I realized I was shaking. Webb addressed Christine and Cameron. You're both free to leave for now, but you are not to contact Mrs. Thornton directly. Do not call. Do not text. Do not come to this property. We flagged your passports. You are not to leave Spokane County without written permission from the court. If you do, you'll be arrested immediately. Do you understand? Christine nodded mutely. Cameron stood, his movements stiff and mechanical. One more thing. Klein added, his tone polite but unyielding. We will be seeking a restraining order and filing a civil suit for damages. The court will decide restitution. Christine stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She looked at me one last time, her face a mask of desperation. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I said nothing. Cameron took her arm and guided her toward the door. Thomas opened it. They walked out into the bright October morning, their shadows long on the porch steps. The door closed behind them with a soft final click. The house fell silent. I stood in the middle of my living room, the room where Robert and I had celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where we had rocked our babies to sleep, where we had grown old together. The room that had almost been stolen from me. Carol stepped closer and took my hand. Are you all right? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I knew. Outside, I heard an engine start. Christine's car pulled away from the curb, the sound fading down South Grand Boulevard until it was gone. Thomas closed the curtain. "Mom, you did the right thing." I nodded, but my chest felt hollow. I had protected my home. I had stood my ground. But I had also just severed a bond I had spent 38 years building. "I know," I whispered, "but it doesn't feel right." Klein stood and gathered his papers. "Mrs. Thornton, I'll be in touch tomorrow. Try to rest." Webb tipped his head. "Ma'am, you're safe now. We'll make sure of it." They left together, and then it was just Thomas, Carol, and me. The house was quiet. The morning sun warmed the hardwood floors. Somewhere outside, a crow called from the oak tree Robert used to trim every spring. I had won, but I had lost something too. Carol squeezed my hand. "Let's make some tea." I nodded and let her lead me toward the kitchen, Thomas following close behind. My house settled around us, familiar and whole. 2 weeks had passed since that Tuesday morning, and I sat in Edward Klein's office on a gray November afternoon, watching the rain streak down the tall windows that looked out over Riverside Avenue. The streets below were slick and dark, the bare branches of the sycamores swaying in the wind. Spokane in early November always felt like this quiet, waiting the weight of winter settling in. Klein sat across from me, his desk neat, and organized a stack of legal documents in a manila folder before him. Thomas sat to my right, his jaw tight, his hands folded on his lap. Carol had offered to come, but I had asked her to stay home. This meeting was about closure, and I needed to face it with just my son beside me. "Mrs. Thornton." Klein began, his voice steady and calm. "I want to walk you through what's happened over the past 2 weeks. The justice system moved quickly in this case, largely because Deputy Webb and the FBI coordinated their efforts." I nodded, my throat dry. I had been preparing for this moment, but hearing it laid out in detail was something else entirely. Klein opened the folder. Cameron Hayes was arrested on November 5th. The Spokane County prosecutor filed charges for elder financial abuse, forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. But the FBI's elder fraud unit also opened an investigation. Thomas leaned forward. "What did they find?" Klein's expression darkened. "Cameron wasn't targeting only your mother. They discovered he had defrauded 5 other elderly individuals over the past 18 months, 3 in Seattle, 2 in Tacoma. The total financial damage exceeded $1.2 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. 5 other people, 5 other families torn apart. Cameron used the same pattern," Klein continued. "He posed as a financial advisor, gained their trust, forged documents, and siphoned money from their accounts. In 2 cases, he convinced elderly clients to sign over property deeds. One woman lost her home entirely before her nephew intervened. I closed my eyes. I had been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't considered the possibility Cameron had done this before and to others. "What's his sentence?" Thomas asked, his voice hard. "The state court sentenced him to 12 years for the crimes against your mother. The federal court added 6 more years for interstate fraud and conspiracy. He's also facing $500,000 in fines and restitution payments. His assets have been frozen, and he'll serve the full 18 years without parole." 18 years. Cameron would be nearly 60 when he got out, if he got out. Klein turned a page. "Rick Morrison, the man Cameron hired to pose as a doctor, pled guilty immediately. He received 3 years in prison for fraud and impersonation of a medical professional. He's already been transferred to a facility in Walla Walla." I thought of Rick Morrison, Cameron's college friend, a furniture salesman who had agreed to fake a medical assessment for $8,000. 3 years seemed almost light, but I supposed he had cooperated fully. "And Christine?" I asked quietly. Klein's face softened. Christine's case was more complicated. She cooperated with the prosecutor from the beginning. She provided testimony against Cameron, including text messages and recorded phone calls that proved he was the primary architect of the scheme. Thomas made a sound low in his throat, but Klein raised a hand. "I'm not defending her, Thomas. What she did was serious, but the prosecutor offered her a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation, and she took it." "What deal?" I whispered. 2 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, a fine of $50,000. Her real estate license has been permanently revoked, and there's a no-contact order. She is not permitted to reach out to you for 2 years. If she violates any of these terms, she'll be sent to prison immediately. I stared at the rain outside. 2 years of probation. No prison time. Part of me felt relieved she was still my daughter. But another part of me felt hollow, as though the justice system had let her off too easily. She'll have a felony on her record, Klein added gently. She won't be able to work in real estate again. Most employers won't hire her. She'll carry this for the rest of her life. Thomas shook his head. She should have gone to prison, maybe Klein said. But the prosecutor felt that Christine's cooperation was valuable and that she genuinely showed remorse. Cameron, on the other hand, showed none. I thought of Christine's face that morning 2 weeks ago, the way she had crumbled when I told her I was pressing charges. I thought of the little girl who used to hold my hand, the teenager who had cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, the young woman who had stood beside her father's hospital bed in his final hours. And I thought of the woman who had tried to steal my home. She made her choice, I said softly. Klein nodded and closed the folder. There's one more thing, Mrs. Thornton. Something I discovered while reviewing your late husband's estate documents. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. My breath caught. I recognized Robert's handwriting, immediately strong, slanted, unmistakable. To Barbara, open only when you need me. The date was written in the corner, August 12, 2019. Where did you find this? I breathed. In Robert's safe deposit box at Spokane Community Credit Union, Klein said. It was filed with his will and a few other documents. The bank manager gave it to me last week when I requested copies of the estate paperwork. Thomas leaned closer, his eyes wide. What is it? Klein set the envelope on the desk in front of me. I don't know. I haven't opened it. It's addressed to you. But there's something else you should know. He handed me a single sheet of paper, a bank statement dated September 2019. Robert established a legal defense fund 4 years ago. He set aside $25,000 specifically to protect you in the event of a dispute over the house or your finances. The fund is still intact. I used a portion of it to cover the initial legal fees, but there's still over $20,000 remaining. My hands trembled as I stared at the statement. Robert had known. He had known that something like this might happen, and he had prepared for it. Even in death, he had been protecting me. He must have suspected Christine might try something, Thomas said quietly. Dad never said anything to me, but he always worried about her spending. I remembered the arguments Robert and Christine had in her 20s, the way he would sigh and shake his head after she called asking for money. He had loved her fiercely, but he had also seen her flaws more clearly than I had. Klein stood. Mrs. Thornton, I'll leave you and Thomas alone for a few minutes. Take your time. He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I sat in the dim office, the rain tapping against the window, the envelope resting in my lap. Thomas reached over and squeezed my hand. Do you want me to open it? He asked. I shook my head. No, I need to do this. But I didn't move. I stared at Robert's handwriting, at the careful loops and lines that I had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and love notes tucked into my purse. I traced my finger over the wax seal, feeling the ridge of it beneath my fingertip. Open only when you need me. I'm here, Robert, I whispered. I need you now. But I didn't break the seal, not yet. I wasn't ready. The weight of the past 2 weeks, the betrayal, the legal battles, the sentencing pressed down on me, and I realized I needed time to breathe before I could face whatever Robert had left me. I slipped the envelope into my purse and stood slowly. Thomas rose with me. Let's go home, I said. He nodded, and together we left Klein's office, stepping out into the cold November rain. The letter would wait. For now, I just needed to go home. The house was silent when I returned. Thomas had offered to stay, but I'd asked him to go home. I needed to be alone for this. The envelope sat in my purse like a stone, heavy and waiting. I made a cup of tea. I didn't drink. I turned on the lamp in the living room. I sat in Robert's old armchair, the one with the worn leather armrests and the faint smell of sawdust, and pulled the envelope into my lap. The cream-colored paper was thick. The red wax seal bore the imprint of his wedding ring, the same ring I now wore on a chain around my neck. The date in the corner was written in his careful hand, August 12, 2019, 3 months before he died. I traced my finger over his handwriting to Barbara. Open only when you need me. I need you now, I whispered. I broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on lined paper. Robert's script was neat and steady, the loops and angles as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. I unfolded it slowly and began to read. My dearest Barbara, if you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped would never come to pass, but knew deep down that it might. I need to tell you something I haven't been able to say aloud. In July, the doctors found cancer in my pancreas. Late stage. They gave me a few months, maybe less. I didn't want to tell you right away because I didn't want to watch you grieve while I was still here. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. And I'm sorry for that, Barbara. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer, but I need you to know that I've spent the last weeks preparing for what comes after. I know Christine. My breath caught. I stopped reading, my vision blurring. He had known. He had always known. I wiped my eyes and kept going. I know Christine better than I wanted to. I've watched her for years, the way she asks for money, and never pays it back, the way she manipulates your kindness, the way she looks at this house like it's already hers. I've tried to help her grow up, but I don't think she ever will. She's my daughter and I love her, but I also know what she's capable of. I've set up protections for you. I updated my will in June. Everything goes to you, Barbara, and only you. I've created a legal defense fund with $25,000 set aside, specifically to protect your ownership of this house. I've left instructions with my lawyer to act immediately if anyone challenges your rights. I've also spoken to Thomas. I told him that when I'm gone, his first responsibility is to you, not his sister. He understands. He's a good man, Barbara. He'll do what's right. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the tears come. Robert had seen it all. He had known Christine would try something, and he had built a wall around me before he even left. I steadied my breathing and read on. There's one more thing I need you to remember. Last summer, I planted a new rose in the garden. Do you remember the one near the back fence with the pale pink blooms? It's called Trust Your Heart. I chose it for you, Barbara. When I'm gone, and you're facing something difficult, something that pulls at your love and your loyalty, I want you to look at that rose and remember this. Trust your heart. Trust your instincts. Don't let guilt or sentimentality cloud your judgment. You've always been too kind. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. But kindness without boundaries becomes weakness, and people will take advantage of that, even people who should love you most. If Christine or anyone else tries to take what's yours, don't forgive them just because they're family. Family is supposed to protect you, not exploit you. If they betray that, they've forfeited the right to your mercy. You are strong, Barbara, stronger than you think, and you have every right to defend yourself. I'm giving you permission. No, I'm asking you to be strong, to stand your ground, to protect what we built together. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving. The final paragraph was shorter, softer. I love you, Barbara. I've loved you since the day I met you at that church picnic in 1978, when you laughed so hard at my terrible joke that you spilled lemonade all over your dress. I've loved you through every moment of our life together, the good ones and the hard ones. I'll be with you always, in the garden, in the house, in the life you keep living after I'm gone. Trust your heart. Yours forever, Robert. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. My whole body shook with sobs, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I hadn't allowed myself to visit in 4 years. I cried for Robert. I cried for the life we'd had. I cried for the daughter I'd lost and for the son who had stayed. But most of all, I cried because Robert had given me exactly what I needed: permission to be strong. I wiped my face and stood slowly. I walked to the window and looked out into the backyard. The November evening was dark and cold, but I could just make out the shape of the rose bush near the back fence, the one Robert had planted in 2018. Trust your heart. I hadn't even known the name until now. I thought of Christine sitting somewhere in Spokane tonight. I thought of Cameron awaiting transfer. I thought of the probation ahead, the community service, the fine, and I felt no guilt. Robert had given me permission to survive. He had told me that defending myself was not cruelty, it was strength. I walked to the small desk and pulled out my journal. I turned to a blank page and wrote, November 8th, 2023. I read Robert's letter today. He knew. He always knew. He told me to trust my heart to be strong to protect what we built. And that's what I'm doing. I'm not pressing charges to punish Christine. I'm doing it because she tried to steal my life and I have the right to defend it. I'm doing it because forgiveness without accountability is just enabling. I'm doing it because Robert asked me to survive. This isn't revenge. This is survival. I closed the journal. I folded Robert's letter and slipped it into the wooden box where I kept our wedding photos and his old watch. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness listening to the house settle around me. Robert was gone, but his love, his protection was still here. And so was I. April in Spokane was always a revelation. After the long gray months of winter, the city woke up in pastels, magnolia trees blooming white cherry blossoms, dropping pink petals on sidewalks, tulips pushing through the soil. The air smelled clean and new, and the mornings were bright enough to make you believe in second chances. I sat in my backyard on a Saturday morning, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, and watched sunlight filter through the oak tree Robert used to trim every spring. 6 months had passed since that terrible Tuesday in October. 6 months since I'd stood in my living room and watched my daughter walk out the door. I was 66 now. My hair was grayer. My hands still trembled sometimes when I thought too hard about what had almost happened. But I was still here, still standing, still living in the house Robert and I had built our life in. And I was learning slowly how to move forward. On Thursday afternoons, I attended a support group at the Spokane Public Library. It was called the Elder Abuse Recovery Circle, led by Margaret Reynolds Maggie, she insisted we call her. She was about 60 with short silver hair and kind eyes, and she'd spent 30 years as a social worker before starting the group. There were 8 of us who met regularly. Most were women in their 60s and 70s. We gathered in a small meeting room and told our stories. Some had been scammed by strangers. Others, like me, had been betrayed by family. The first time I'd walked into that room in late November, I'd felt ashamed. I thought I was the only one, the only mother foolish enough to let her daughter nearly steal her home. But when I heard the others speak about sons who'd forged checks about nephews who'd emptied bank accounts, I realized I wasn't alone. Maggie had a saying she repeated at the end of every session: "You are not responsible for what was done to you. You are only responsible for how you heal." I was still learning how to do that. Thomas had moved back to Spokane in January. He'd given up his job in Seattle and found a position with a software company in Spokane Valley. He rented an apartment 10 minutes from my house and came by every Sunday to help with yard work or fix things Robert used to handle. "You don't have to do this," I'd told him when he first announced he was moving. "I'm fine, Thomas. I'm not giving it up, Mom," he'd said firmly. "I'm choosing it. Dad asked me to take care of you, and even if he hadn't, I'd still be here." So he came, every Sunday. Sometimes we worked in silence, pulling weeds or trimming hedges. Other times we talked about his new job, about Carol's knee surgery, about small, normal things that made life feel manageable again. He never mentioned Christine unless I did. In February, Deputy Webb had called with an update. Cameron's sentence had been increased to 23 years. The FBI had uncovered 2 more victims in Idaho and 1 in Oregon. He would serve his time in a facility in California far from Spokane. Christine had filed for divorce in December. It was finalized in March. She was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Valley, working part-time at Target to pay off her $50,000 fine and support her son, Lucas, my grandson. I hadn't seen him in over a year. I thought about him often, wondered if he remembered me, wondered what Christine had told him about why Grandma didn't come around anymore. And then 2 weeks ago, a letter had arrived. It was 4 pages long, handwritten on lined notebook paper. "Dear Mom, I know I have no right to write to you. I know the court said I'm not supposed to contact you, but I'm hoping you'll read this. I don't know where to start except to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't explain how I let Cameron convince me that what we were doing was okay, or how I convinced myself that you'd be better off at Cascade. I was desperate. We owed so much money. Cameron said if we lost everything, Lucas would lose his home, his school, and I believed him. But that's not an excuse. It's just an explanation, and it doesn't change what I did to you. I switched your medication. I set up that fall. I let Cameron break into your house. I forged your signature. I tried to steal your life, Mom, and I will never forgive myself for that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I'm working. I'm paying my fines. I'm going to therapy. I'm raising Lucas the best I can. Lucas drew you a picture. He asks about you sometimes. He says he misses Grandma's rose garden. I miss you too, Mom. I love you. I always have. And I always will. Christine. I'd read the letter 3 times, and each time I'd cried. The drawing was tucked inside a crayon sketch of a woman standing in a garden surrounded by roses. The woman had gray hair and a blue dress, and she was smiling. In the corner, in wobbly letters, Lucas had written, "For Grandma." I'd folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer in Robert's old desk next to his letter. I wasn't ready to forgive Christine. I wasn't sure I ever would be, but I also couldn't pretend she didn't exist. She was still my daughter. Lucas was still my grandson. Maybe someday I would be ready to see them again, but not yet. Not now. I stood and walked to the back fence where the rose bush Robert had planted was beginning to bloom. The buds were small and tight pale pink with darker edges, and they smelled faintly sweet in the morning air. Trust your heart. I reached out and touched one of the blooms gently the way Robert used to. "I'm still here," I whispered. "I'm still standing." And for the first time in 6 months, I believed it. The house behind me was warm and whole. The garden was waking up. Thomas would be by tomorrow. Carol would call in the afternoon. Maggie's group met again on Thursday. I had a life, a real one. A life I had fought for and defended and earned. And I was going to be okay. October in Spokane always felt like a kind of reckoning. The leaves turned gold and crimson, the air sharpened with the promise of winter, and the city seemed to hold its breath before the long cold settled in. 2 years had passed since that Tuesday morning when my life had nearly been stolen from me. 2 years since I'd stood in this same garden and decided to fight back. I was 67 now. My hair was fully gray, cut shorter than I used to wear it. My hands were steadier. And the house behind me, the Craftsman on South Grand Boulevard that Robert and I had bought in 1987, was still mine. The no-contact order had expired last month. Edward Klein had called to let me know and to ask if I was willing to meet with Christine under supervised conditions. I'd thought about it for a week. I'd talked to Thomas. I'd talked to Carol. I'd sat in Maggie's support group and listened to other survivors talk about forgiveness and boundaries. And then I'd said yes, but on my terms. We met at Klein's office on a gray afternoon in late September. Christine sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, her face thinner than I remembered. She wore a Target name tag pinned to her blue polo shirt. Her eyes were red before she even spoke. Klein read the conditions aloud. Christine was not to ask me for money. She was not to come to my house uninvited. If I agreed to see my grandchildren, it would be in public places with supervision, and only as often as I felt comfortable. Christine nodded at every condition. "I understand," she whispered. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for even being willing to try." I didn't say "you're welcome." I wasn't there yet, but I nodded, and that was enough. 2 weeks later, I met my grandchildren at Bonito Park. Thomas drove me. Carol came along for support, though she stayed on a bench near the rose garden while I walked toward the small pond where Christine waited with 2 children. Lucas I recognized immediately. He was taller now, maybe 8 years old, with brown eyes and a mop of sandy hair. But the girl beside him was new to me. "This is Emma," Christine said quietly. "She's 10. She was born in 2015. You didn't know about her." I stared at the little girl, thin with Christine's dark hair and Robert's blue eyes. She looked at me shyly, her hands clasped behind her back. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. My throat tightened. I knelt down slowly, my knees protesting, and looked at both of them. "Hi, Emma. Hi, Lucas." Lucas didn't wait. He ran forward and threw his arms around my neck, nearly knocking me over. I caught him, held him, and felt something inside me break open. Something I'd been holding closed for 2 years. "I missed you," he said into my shoulder. "I missed you too, sweetheart," I whispered. Emma stayed back cautious, but after a moment she stepped closer and put one small hand on my arm. "I drew you another picture," she said. "Mom said you liked the first one." I looked up at Christine, who was crying silently. I looked back at Emma. "I did," I said. "I kept it. It's in a frame on my wall." Emma smiled. We walked around the pond together, the kids chattering about school and their favorite cartoons, and the neighbor's dog. Christine stayed a few steps behind, giving me space. Thomas and Carol watched from a distance. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. Over the past 2 years, I'd found a new purpose. Maggie had encouraged me to share my story, and in the spring of 2024, I'd written an article for the Spokane Chronicle titled, "How I Almost Lost My Home to My Own Daughter and How I Fought Back." I didn't use Christine's name. I didn't need to. The story was enough. Within a week, I'd received over 200 emails from people across the state, some sharing their own stories, others asking for advice. I became a volunteer with the Washington State Elder Justice Coalition. I spoke at community centers and senior living facilities. I helped other survivors navigate the legal system, connect with lawyers, and find support groups. And every October, I hosted Robert's Woodworking Day. Thomas had helped me set it up the first year a fundraiser held in my backyard and garage, where we taught kids how to sand wood and build simple birdhouses just like Robert used to do. We sold handmade cutting boards and picture frames, and all the proceeds went to the Spokane Elder Abuse Prevention Fund. This year, over 50 people had come. Carol manned the lemonade stand, Thomas ran the power tools, and I stood in Robert's old workshop surrounded by the smell of sawdust and the sound of laughter and felt him with me. Now as the sun set on this October evening, I stood in the garden one last time, the rose bush Robert had planted. Trust Your Heart was still blooming pale pink against the fence. I touched one of the petals gently. "I did what you told me to do," I said quietly. I trusted my heart. I stood my ground, and I'm still here. I thought about Christine working her shifts at Target, raising 2 kids on her own, paying off her debt dollar by dollar. I thought about Cameron serving 23 years in a federal prison in California. I thought about the life I'd built in the wreckage of what they'd tried to take. I didn't regret pressing charges. I didn't regret fighting back. I had protected the foundation of my home and my life. And I would do it again, not with anger, but with peace. I walked back to the house as the porch light flickered on. Thomas would be here soon for dinner. Carol was bringing pie. The table was set, the soup was simmering on the stove, and the house smelled like home. I stepped inside and closed the door gently behind me. The living room was warm. The floors creaked in all the familiar places. Robert's chair sat by the window. My journal rested on the side table. This was my house, my life, my peace. I was home, truly home, and I was free. Looking back at this family drama story, I learned that sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing the people you love most. Don't be like me. Don't wait until you're almost losing everything to set boundaries. Trust your instincts early. This family revenge stories taught me that standing up for yourself isn't revenge, it's survival. When family drama story turns into betrayal, you have the right to defend what's yours. God gave us wisdom for a reason to protect ourselves and honor the lives we've built. My advice: don't let guilt silence you. Don't confuse forgiveness with enabling. In family revenge stories, the real victory isn't punishing others, it's reclaiming your peace. These family drama story moments test us, but they also reveal our strength. And yes, family revenge stories can end with healing, not hatred. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this journey. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you do if you found yourself in Barbara's impossible situation? I genuinely want to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you won't miss future stories. A gentle reminder: while inspired by real social issues surrounding elder abuse, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content doesn't resonate with you, feel free to explore other videos that might suit your preferences better.